Without any training, you can run the 100 meters in 11 seconds, jump a meter 80, and in the long jump, do 6 meters 50. You know, I cannot remember in 3 decades of playing football that anyone ever robbed me of the ball by coming at me from behind. And then it comes to this idea that, like, the thing that greatest athletes don't have is what made them. So Santos had a gym, and Mazzi had Pele doing karate for a year and then judo. And it reminded me of Maradona as well when I heard this. If the torta sent me on an errand, I would take with me anything that resembled a ball. It could be an orange or scrumpled up paper or cloths, and I would go up the steps onto the bridge that crossed the railway, hopping on one foot, the right one, and taking whatever it was on the left. Tack, tack, tack. That's how I walked to school as well. The man who became one of the greatest footballers in the world. It was a system that built him. I mentioned everything that came before him, and by the time that he became famous, Pelé played with a sock tied with string. What does that mean? It means that no matter your situation, no matter your environment, they just start. Waldemar used to say that the most important rule for a player to become a great footballer was that he had to know how to control the ball with both feet, with his head and with his chest. He had to know how to receive a pass too, to touch the ball onto wherever he wants to go, that the ball is the player's tool. Anyone who can't control it will never be a real player, still less a great one. Many of my teammates were very skillful. They could run well with the ball, tackle well and perform tricks, but not all of them knew how to receive the ball. They didn't have this extra vision that I seem to have. Maybe it's something you can't teach. You either have it or you don't, and this is what I definitely had. An ability to anticipate what was going to happen slightly before everyone else. Even after I became professional, people would say, "How did you see that coming?" And I would reply, "I don't know, I just did." Lots of kids can be very good, but they have a slight delay when they are on the ball. I was just quicker. You know, I cannot remember in 3 decades of playing football that anyone ever robbed me of the ball by coming at me from behind. Not the way I see it happen so often to other players. No one was ever able to do this because I would always notice them coming. I can't explain how or why, whether I heard them or whether I saw them, or whether it was a sixth sense, and I've been like that since I was a boy. Maybe I developed it because in those days there would be loads of us playing in very small spaces, so you had to be really quick. This is Legends Podcast, and that is from the book Pelé, Autobiography. This is my second episode on him. The first episode was the story of the boy who made a promise to his dad and kept it. This time around, it's about how he actually got good enough to keep that promise. All the training, the moves, the people around him, the key influences, what he was actually doing day after day for 20 years that made him that great. Played across 3 decades, and he says himself that nobody ever got the ball off Pelé. And he says it himself that nobody ever got the ball from behind him, which is amazing. And when he tries to explain why, listen to where he ends up. So this thing that he calls a gift, this thing that he says you can't really teach, turns out he got it the same way anyone gets anything, and it's the same old rule, Malcolm Gladwell's rule, is spending thousands of hours doing it over and over again on repeat. So I want to start with what Pelé and his friends actually played with as kids, because it's very important. We started to spend more and more time dreaming about football, and when we could We started to spend more and more time dreaming about football and when we could next get to play. We had no kit, of course, not even a ball, and we had to make do with stuffing paper or rags into a stock. We started to spend more and more time dreaming about football and when we could next get to play. We had no kit, of course, not even a ball, and we had to make do with stuffing paper or rags into a sock or stocking, shaping it as best we could into a sphere and then tying it with a string. So they're playing with a ball made of stockings. Think about what it's like to control something like that, something that's like lopsided, comes out of the air at the wrong angle and it's way too light when you have to kick it around. So, and then when you want it to go where you want it to go, you have to be more precise than any kid playing with an actual proper football. And then it comes to this idea that, like, the thing that greatest athletes don't have is what made them. So he didn't have a proper football, so you had to make do with anything else. I think that develops passion. To go out of your way and play with something that's obviously not as enjoyable as the real thing, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. And it reminded me of Maradona as well when I heard this. We would always be there in the Potrero waste ground, running after the ball. Saturdays and Sundays were spent like that all day long, weekdays too, but only from 5 o'clock because during the day I had to go to school. Everything I did, every step I took was because of the ball. If the torta sent me on an errand, I would take with me anything that resembled a ball. It could be an orange or scrumpled up paper or cloths, and I would go up the steps onto the bridge that crossed the railway, hopping on one foot, the right one, and taking whatever it was on the left. Tack, tack, tack. That's how I walked to school as well. So Maradona's walking to school, hopping on one foot with an orange, doing keepy uppies. Pele's and Bauer's playing with a ball that's made out of a sock. And these are the two of the greatest footballers in history that we're talking about, and they're growing up doing this thing every day for years before they're known as great footballers. So most kids, if they want to play football and they don't have a kit, they just keep playing. But Pele was a little bit different. He said this: "I was a restless creative boy. What I really wanted was to have a club of our own. Playing outside the house was great, but I yearned to do it properly. To emulate my father and the other players we saw on the training pitch, which abutted the end of the street. This meant we'd have to buy some proper kit. Shirts, shorts, boots, socks, a ball. But what about the money? We'd have to get a hold of some." So they wanted to create their own club, they needed money. Pele's only 11 years old, maybe 12 years, and they've got nothing. And then they figure out how to make some. And they're quite creative actually with the ideas that they come out with. A kid called Z Porto had the brainwave. He suggested that we sell peanuts at the door to the circus and the cinema. The first problem: where would we get the peanuts? Z Porto smiled and told us his delinquent idea: we'll nick them from the Sorocabana stores. This was a kind of warehouse down by the railway. There were always workers down there, and the plan was risky. So this is what happened. This is how the operation played out. I almost died of fright as I made my way in. We carried old bowls, sieves, an old bucket to get the peanuts in. We slit some of the sacks. They were huge. The peanuts came spilling out in a flood, and we gathered them up as fast as we could. We filled our pockets too, and put still more in our shirts, and passed them out to the others waiting outside the wagon. And then it was done. We'd got away with it, and ran off laughing at our nerves and our relief. After our great victory, which had held me in a cold sweat throughout, our dream was becoming a reality. We toasted the peanuts and went off to sell them. Soon we had money for shirts. Well, for vests, there wasn't that much money. We bought shorts too. So stealing isn't really the point. The point is the urgency that most kids in that situation just play without a club because they've got no money. But Pele built his own at 11 years old by stealing peanuts out of a train. And I keep noticing this with every legend. They're not all stealing peanuts out of a train, but they're all trying to figure out their own way of doing things, of pursuing their passion when nobody's watching. And they don't wait to be picked or they don't wait to be helped. They just start. The other big thing was football de salão, the Brazilian indoor game. So it's where they play football indoors, play on a hard court, much smaller than a football pitch, and it's a heavier ball that doesn't really bounce as much. It's 5-a-side, sometimes 7, and it's fast play, it's fast and tight. And here's what Pele says it did for him. In my mid-teens, I also played indoor football, which had just taken off in Bauru, for a team called Radium, and took place in the first Football de Salão championship to be held in Bauru. We won. It was a new thing and I took it like a fish to water. It's a lot quicker than football and grass. You have to think really quickly because everyone is so close to each other. Learning the game probably helped me think on my feet better. It was through Football de Salão that I first got my chance to play with adults. I was about 14 and I can remember that there was a tournament for which I was told I was too young to take part. In the end, I was allowed to play. I ended up top scorer with 14 or 15 goals. That gave me a lot of confidence. I knew then not to be afraid of whatever might come. So it's the first time he played indoor football, and I've never played it. So I've never played proper futsal before where they play like how the Brazilians play. I played indoor football, which is 5-a-side, and in my experience, Pele's right, it's a lot harder to play. People are on you a lot quicker and you have less time to think. So I think the really great players thrive because they can sense what's around them, they're more aware. And for anyone who's a touch player as well, you could do one touch passes and that's the best way to carry forward. So you can imagine that definitely would help your knowledge. That would definitely help you in a bigger pitch where you have more time to think. And you know what? It's actually the Barcelona team that dominated for more than a decade, where they had players like Iniesta, Xavi, Busquets, Messi. They all grew up playing football in tight spaces, all these little drills that they did. That's why they could keep the ball with two defenders breathing down their neck. And a lot of footballers spent their childhood doing exactly that. Pele learned the exact same thing in Bauru in 1955. So when Pele gets to Santos, he's picked up a second framework from a man called Waldemar de Brito, and he was a scout who brought Pele there in the first place. And he wasn't just any scout; he was a former Brazilian international, and he gave Pele the whole framework. You heard at the top of the episode that both feet, head, chest. You have to receive cleanly. You have to place it exactly where you want it, and that's the five fundamentals. And that's basically the whole game in five things. There's nothing fancy, just the basics drilled until it's automatic and muscle memory. And Pele worked on them obsessively, including the foot he was actually weaker on. He said this: I trained hard. I've always been a perfectionist. I still am. I worked most on my left foot, since it wasn't as powerful as the right foot. I also practiced headers. Back in those days, there was a contraption that had a ball hanging from it, that you would jump up to practice heading. You don't get them anymore, but they were very important. So he spent hours on his weaker foot. That contraption that he's talking about is interesting as well. I actually searched it up. It's a little bit like a slip bag in boxing that Mike Tyson used. That it's like a sack hanging from the ceiling, and you're just jumping up and heading it. So I don't think anyone has that anymore. It's the first time I've ever heard of it, but very creative. So people might look at Pele and players alike and assume they're born with it, and the same thing was said about Maradona. But here's what Maradona's coach Cesar Menotti said about Diego. I'm always cautious about the word genius. The beauty of Diego's game has a congenital element, his relationship with the ball, but also owes a lot to his ability to learn. A lot of those brush strokes, those strokes of genius, are in fact of a product of his hard work. Diego worked very hard to be the best. It's the fact that he's saying he worked very hard to be best. The thing that looks like talent and just, God-given genius from the outside is actually, more often than not, a man that's put in a lot of hours behind the scenes, and often you wouldn't even know because it's just passion to them. They do it for fun, so you would never know that they're doing it that much. They always have a ball at their feet, and that's what Maradona did. So I want to speak about the principle that the whole episode sort of rides on for me, and it comes from Pele's mentor at Santos, Professor Julio Mazzi. Listen to who Mazzi was to him. It was Professor Julio Mazzi who turned out to be the man who most encouraged the realization of this dream of mine, always telling me that I should study. When I told him I was considering it, he was delighted and told me that I could depend on his help. He used to tell me that it was not important if I was the best athlete in the world. What was important was to be the most intelligent athlete in the world. When we went on trips with Santos, he used to bring books along and give us impromptu English and Spanish lessons. So, Professor Mazzi lived this himself. He'd bring books on tour with him and he'd give English lessons to Pele, and his approach went beyond books too. Santos had a gym and Mazzi had Pele doing karate for a year and then judo, and it's something that you'd see a lot in sports. Actually, a lot of athletes, great athletes, they transfer skills from other sports, so they'll be multi-talented or multi-skilled in different sports, and it will sometimes cross over. And you can imagine karate and judo would give you a lot of strength, especially when it comes to holding an opponent, holding a defender, being able to hold someone off, and also teaching yourself how to fall as well. So whenever Pele's getting hacked, you would be able to fall a little bit more safer. There are some of the things that come to mind when I think about what those sports could have done for his football. And so Pele eventually got a degree in physical education while still playing professionally, and here's why he says he did it. I did get my degree in physical education in order to be a football coach. I have no desire to be a coach, and never have. I did set an example. When you want to be something, you have to fight for it. I only succeeded from every point of view because I decided I was going to study and followed through on that decision. I'd give the same advice to all young people, whether they're athletes or not. Studying is fundamental, and determination brings success. So the man who had no reason to study in his life decided to go and earn a degree while he was still playing for Brazil, just to set an example. And I don't think I've properly done it justice what his schedule was like then. I mean, really, even after reading the book, I don't understand how he did it. I don't understand how he got a degree. The only thing I can think of is by being really pessimistic and saying that the degree was a little bit easier, but I don't think it was, because from what he says, the professors didn't give him any leeway, and they were just as hard on him as the other students. So I think credit goes to the man. I mean, when you're as great as he is, there's a focus that you have that no ordinary individual can really do. Like, I wouldn't be able to focus on something as random as that, because Sugar Ray Leonard actually did the same thing. He studied his opponents on film, broke them down by move every fight. Mike Tyson did the same. He was obsessed with old fighters. He'd go back to guys like Jack Dempsey and Jack Johnson, and he could tell you the head movement of every great and he could tell you about moments of every great heavyweight from 100 years of boxing history, and managers do it too actually. Pep Guardiola is the obvious one. If you watch the Man City documentary on Amazon, you'll see what I mean. Like Pep's in his office at all hours, he's studying tape, he's drawing up tactics, and he's breaking down every player's movement in front of his whole squad, and he's teaching them lessons. And the clearest version of this in any sport is Kobe. This is what his AAU coach grew up saying about him. Kobe's a genius in basketball. I think he worked to perfection. I think he studied the game harder than anyone has ever studied the game. That's a big statement. I mean, he wasn't even the most talented basketball player of his era, but he'd be the first to tell you that. He was just the biggest student of the game. So I want to come back to the same idea that I've brought up in previous episodes. Behind almost every great athlete, there's an architect, a teacher, not a coach exactly, but someone who designs the routine, the habits, the systems that builds a champion. And Pele had three of them in his life. He had Dondinho, his dad. He had Waldemar de Brito, who scouted him, and then he had Mazzi Santos, who was his coach, his fitness coach. The clearest architect moment in the whole book, and I keep coming back to it, was Pelé when he was a teenager and he'd been caught smoking, and listen to what his dad does. My father, who was always my friend through my whole life, came close to me, looked me in the eye and said, "You've got a talent for football, you might even get to be a star, but you won't succeed in this profession if you smoke and drink. Your body won't be able to take it." He took his wallet from his pocket, gave me some money and said some words that would teach me another lesson, one I'll never forget. If you want to smoke, you should smoke your own cigarettes. Don't keep scrounging them from other people. At that moment, I saw again how much he loved me, and I knew that he was right. After that day, I never smoked again. I'm absolutely convinced that my father's gesture and his words were what saved me. If I'd been beaten, perhaps I wouldn't have stopped smoking. Corporal punishment isn't always the answer. This made me admire my father even more. He was a simple man, but a man of dignity and vision. So they had one conversation, no shouting, no beating, and his dad's very calm with him. He's very wise, very dignified, like Pelé says, and he gives Pelé a moment that shapes the rest of his life. And there's one moment that I keep coming back to, and it's with Mike Tyson and Cus D'Amato. Mike Tyson is my favourite boxer of all time, my most favourite athlete, probably my favourite athlete of all time. Cus didn't just teach Tyson how to box. What's special is how he built his psychology from scratch, from the ground up. Tyson grew up pretty much terrified of everything. He used to get bullied. He used to love like pigeons. He would fly them, and there was one story where one kid just came and twisted and broke the pigeon's neck in front of Tyson. I couldn't do anything about it. And even at the peak of his career, when he's walking to the ground, he says in interviews that he was scared, and the closer that he got to the ring, he'd get more confident. And Cus had this whole philosophy about fear that he drilled into Tyson over and over. And the most famous version is this: I tell my kids, what is the difference between a hero and a coward? What is the difference between yellow and being brave? No difference, only what you do. They both feel the same. They both fear dying and getting hurt. The man who is yellow refuses to face up to what he's got to face. The hero is more disciplined and he fights those feelings off and he does what he has to do. But they both feel the same. The hero and the coward. People who watch you judge you on what you do, not how you feel. This guy is incredible, man. Cus D'Amato was... there's so many quotes like this of his. If you watch him in an interview, the guy is so wise, and like his whole like interpretation of psychology is insane. And what he did is he didn't try and take Tyson's fear away. He told him that fear is normal and that fear is fine, and it's something that every fighter needs. But the thing that makes you a hero or a coward is what you do with it. And he taught Tyson the peekaboo style as well because it suited his height. So, he was a psychologist and he was a great trainer as well. When Cus died, you can see Tyson came apart. He lost to Buster Douglas in one of the biggest upsets in boxing history in 1990. He wasn't the same fighter on paper, and the main thing that he was missing was his architect, Cus D'Amato. And guys like Dondinho, Cus D'Amato, Earl Woods, they have different methods totally, but they all have the same role. There's someone who is older and they see like the long arc, the long path, and they know exactly how to get you there, but you have to be strong enough to actually follow what they say. Almost every legend has an architect. The ones who don't usually break. So listen to this. This is the end of the book. I've always been in excellent shape. God has been generous to me. Even in that, for years, the person who took charge of my physical condition was the able Julio Mazzi, who has been a real brother to me, as I hope this book has made clear. The professor was a maestro in his field, a pioneer, a professor of physical training, always fascinated by the latest techniques. But although we worked hard to maintain my fitness and health, I was lucky to be blessed with a physique tailor-made for sport, especially football to begin with. Julio once told me he thought I could have been an Olympic champion in the decathlon. Such was the all-round nature of my attributes. Without any training, you can run the 100 meters in 11 seconds, jump a meter 80, and in the long jump, do 6 meters 50. Your body responds perfectly to everything in sport. So it's clear that Messi thinks that Pep could have been an Olympic decathlon without any specific training for it. He just had the right body. And the body that played football was, he could play anything really. And he was still playing at his highest levels into his 30s. He won 3 World Cups. He had 6 years at the Cosmos as the best player in the field. This passion and this drive that he had and this body that he had, it was just something that he was like. That's how he was, and the passion lived inside him. He had it every day for 2 decades, and he's someone that scored over 1,200 goals and over 1,300 games. Like those numbers are amazing, and a lot of people actually say that they're fake. When I've done a little bit of reading online, some people say that those goals were fabricated. I don't think they were. I think the only thing that you could say is that he played against opposition that weren't as good. Like the defenders obviously weren't of the same caliber as they are today, and the rules weren't the same. But again, that went against Pelé. Like he got injured a lot because they didn't have red cards or yellow cards. They just had warnings, and they were a lot more rough and brutal back then. Like defenders didn't know how to do a tactical tackle. Like they would just come in and half you straight away. So there's a lot of things that you could say about it. But overall, that is a great book. The whole episode is the answer to Pele's own opening question, and the whole episode is the answer to Pele's own opening words about how through 3 decades nobody got the ball off from behind him, and he says he doesn't really know why. And this episode was about like going into that and figuring out why, and the reasons why is some of the things that I mentioned, is about how he's playing in the street and he's playing with a football that's basically a sock tied with a string. He built his own club at the age of 11 by selling peanuts. Well, firstly he stole peanuts and then he sold them, and then through his Waldemar's fundamentals of football, and then playing karate and things like that. So there's a lot of things that go into it, and then looking back at his career, he's trying to explain why being the best in the world didn't turn him into someone else. And we'll end on this quote. I think I was lucky to have started at Santos at the age of 15 and to have been playing since I was 16. I didn't know anything else but being a footballer. My personality had been formed by this experience. Nowadays, young kids just want to be famous, and when they get there, their personalities change. I think one of the gifts God gave me was that my personality did not change once I became a World Cup champion. I was still me, just me, living in Santos with my friends and doing what I loved to do, playing football. So there you have it. The man who became one of the greatest footballers in the world. It was a system that built him. I mentioned everything that came before him, and by the time that he became famous, only God can really explain how Pelé became Pelé and how he became as good as he was, because we will not be able to see it. Not in this day and age. There's not enough footage around him, but with all the stats and with everything that the greatest players say about him, there's a lot to admire, and I think there's a lot of things that young footballers and young athletes can copy as well from Pele's story. There's some key lessons in there, although I've not really pulled them out, specifically for young athletes, but they're there if you really want to find them. Pelé played with a sock tied with string. What does that mean? It means that no matter your situation, no matter your environment, if you don't have money, if you're poor, if you don't have the luxuries of a real footballer, if you don't have the luxuries of a heavy bag for boxing, for golf, there are things that you can do to practice. There are ways that you can learn off the greatest athletes in the world. There are methods to become the greatest, where you don't have to have the best tools of the game. You don't have to have the most money, but you just have to have the most grit and most willpower and the desire to succeed. And a real passion. These guys only did what they did because they really wanted to play it. Obviously, in this day and age, this goes to a much wider point in conversation, but in this day and age, there's so many more distractions. You have a lot more to do than the likes of Pelé did back in the day, so it's a lot harder. But anyway, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent. I'll maybe do that in another episode and speak about, what was different between back then and now, and what, and then which athletes kind of are breaking the mold in that regard. So that was Pelé autobiography. Again, second episode on it. I would highly recommend reading it, listening to it if it's on autobiography. I would highly recommend reading it to anyone who's interested in football and anyone who's interested in greatness. So yeah, keep an eye out for my next episode. That's one legend down. The work continues.